What's going on, Seawolves? You're watching USG Hot Takes. I'm your host, A.T Bianco, and today our guest is first-year journalism professor, Tania Rashid. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So shout out, first of all, to FSA and Colin Art for the wings, so thank you for the hookup on that. So Tania, what's your experience with hot foods?
I'm South Asian, so I grew up on hot foods. I think I could handle this.
So this will be easy for you?
It should be.
Okay, awesome.
Unless
so you ready to
have something crazy?
You ready to take on the gauntlet then?
Yeah, let's do this.
Cheers.
Cheers.
One bite.
Okay.
Did a little research. You grew up in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah.
And Bangladesh.
Yeah.
What was Tania's experience coming to America?
When I came to America, I didn't speak any English, and I was in Utah of all places. And it is a majority Mormon area where I grew up in Salt Lake City. So I was the only brown girl there, and it was quite the adjustment.
What was that experience like, not really knowing the culture and you kind of being new to a country? What was that experience like?
So I learned English watching Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers. I definitely got a taste of what it's like to feel like an outsider. But the beautiful part of the story is I made a new friend who was initially my enemy and used to bully me a lot. And then somehow we clicked later on.
Would you like to go further in depth about that friend?
So yeah, she used to dump sand on my head. And then my mother got involved with her mother and said, "Why are you doing this to, my daughter?" And then she ended up being that person who stood up for me against other bullies and also helped me learn English as well. I remember her to this day. Her name is Diana Sperry.
So are you ready to get to the second sauce?
Sure.
Clink wings. Cheers.
Right,
One
cheers.
bite. So you studied at UCLA, and you earned your master's at Columbia School of Journalism. Have you always wanted to become a journalist, and what was your experience like in school?
I grew up around stories on mythology and ancient folklore in my culture. My family is Bangladeshi. So growing up around stories of my grandmother, my mother, always fascinated me. And having been around the world, growing up in Bangladesh, Saudi Arabia, and Utah, definitely played a role, meeting different kinds of people under different contexts. But I never knew it was journalism. I just knew I loved stories, and I loved folklore, and I loved the stories that my family had to tell. So then eventually I studied global studies and history at UCLA with an emphasis on South Asia and Africa. And I got an internship with Al Gore's TV network, Current TV, which doesn't exist anymore. But it was a style of storytelling and journalism where it's in the voice of the youth and the young generation.
Oh, okay.
So you
That's
do
interesting.
hard-hitting journalism, but it's you talking. You're not pretending to be someone else.
In storytelling, do you have like a number one thing that you kind of like to stress whenever you go into like a documentary, for example?
I mean, my focus has been mostly on human rights issues, stories of women. It sounds cliche, but giving, voice to people, a platform to people who normally don't have a voice, to be there and to help share their story. Look at the look on his face.
So we're gonna get right into it.
Okay.
So, cheers.
Cheers.
From an outside source, I heard that after you were done with school, you did a story on illegal gold trade somewhere in overseas.
So that was for the National Geographic channel. I was an explorer for about a year, and so I did the story for that.
Talk about your experience doing that and why you did it.
We went to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where we looked into illegal gold mines. And the story was intense. It was very dangerous. There's gold in everything. There's gold in your phone. There's gold jewelry you wear. But where does it really come from? Who's making them? And at what cost? And that's what we explored in our story.
And sometimes it's at the cost of a person's life for example. Talk about the risks, the safety risks that you take doing a story like that.
So yeah, you do risk assessment. I've done hostile environment training classes. Say someone's limb exploded, you'd know how to use a tourniquet, or do CPR if someone, went unconscious and couldn't breathe or was having a heart attack.
So how long did that story take to develop and finish?
It takes time. There's like a whole procedure and process. There's a pre-production process where you are in touch with sources on the ground who are there to help guide you through the story. And then that's like the longest part, setting everything up, making sure everything is secure and that our beats, the visuals we want to get for the story are, organized. And then there's the production process, which I think we spent like close to 2 weeks, 12 days, I think.
So is that, 12-hour, 16-hour days kind of thing?
Long days,
okay.
Long nights, yeah. None of this has been spicy, by the way.
All right, cool.
I have not been impacted
All right,
at all.
well, I'm glad. I'm glad you're not suffering. So we're going to have this sauce here, the bomb.
I thought the point was to make me suffer, to make sure that
Well, I'd rather you not. So I was very impressed after watching some of your work on TaniaRashid.com. So to our viewers, go to TaniaRashid.com. She's got all of her projects on that website, so go view that.
Oh boy.
Did you speak too soon? Maybe a little bit? Milk break. We'll take a milk break.
Whoa. Okay.
So, checked out some of your projects. I was specifically impressed with a project that you worked on called Sugar Babies.
Whew. Yeah.
Talk about your experience in making that and why you wanted to cover that topic.
Whew. Oh man, I was so confident. That is crazy.
It's kind of, oof. It's like
You feel that?
It's like a delayed,
Whew.
it's a delayed reaction.
Oh Lord. So I went undercover as a sugar baby, and I met a sugar daddy whose net worth was 10 million on a website called seekingarrangement.com.
Wow.
And when I met him, he gave me money. There was this whole interesting dynamic that I experienced. And so that was the story I did.
So be careful with your eyes, by the way.
Okay.
I'll give you one of these if you need to wipe down your eyes. So in doing that story, you kind of acted like a detective.
Yeah.
How hard was that? That's a risk. It's a big risk. You're walking a thin line. Why were you willing to go to that extent to tell this story?
It's just showing how far someone is willing to go to survive. A lot of these stories are women who are barely getting by, and this was their last fork on the road to make ends meet. And then they get a taste of the money it brings, and it becomes, for one of my characters, it became an addiction, and her way of getting that nice car and dress. The irony of it all is the dark world that exists within that, and some of them have been brutally tortured and have had to deal with things that they didn't
PTSD and
abuse. Some were raped.
One woman that you interviewed, you talked to, that she said she woke up to getting cigarette butts put out, and she showed you the scars. Having someone show you those and tell you their experience, what was that like, sitting through all of that?
It's really painful to hear stories like that, to hear about, the suffering someone goes through and the abuse. It was really courageous of her to witness her tell her story as a warning of what the bad things are that could happen. Because I also showcase a woman who goes on dates and then makes money and said nothing happened to her.
Right.
But then there's also this dark underbelly that exists in that world.
So this app, Seeking Arrangements, you sat down with, I think, the CEO.
I did.
And you spoke with him. I'm sure there was a lot more said within that interview than you put in the actual piece.
Yeah.
What was that experience like, talking to the man kind of behind all of this, and what was your feeling towards him?
I think he tapped into a market and is selling a dream, and I think they have an image to maintain and money to make off of that site. It was a very, scripted, thought out message from him.
The entire production process of that story, was that one of the longer ones or one of the shorter ones that you've done?
It took a few months
No.
because we traveled all over the U.S. So
Okay.
The woman I interviewed who had the cigarette butts put out on her was in Colorado. The character who was making all that money in the condo and whatnot was in Las Vegas. And then I think part of our shoot, I think I went to a sugar baby convention,
Oh, wow.
was in New York City. So there was a lot of traveling going on. And LA too. That's where I met the sugar daddy
Oh,
and
okay.
had an undercover date with.
So you went undercover and had the date with him.
Yeah.
And I was uncomfortable for you watching that. What was that like? And I'm sure there's some anxiety going into that. Like,
Yeah.
What was that experience like for you?
I felt really objectified, like a piece of meat.
Yeah.
And this guy had obvious fetishes, and I ticked the boxes off for what he wanted. And it was super uncomfortable to be in that position, to see and feel what it's like to be a sugar baby. It definitely gave me a taste of it.
So going to the extent to do a story like this, do you think putting yourself in the position of, the people that you interview kind of give you more of a well-rounded look at the story that you're doing?
I think my style of journalism has been more immersive. I think going into these places and experiencing to some degree what the people are dealing with gives me more insight and context on their lives.
What's your advice to a young female journalist not knowing what she's getting into as far as the safety in these situations?
Go with your instinct. If it doesn't feel right, don't do it. There were moments where I was told to go into certain situations by guides and sources, but in my gut I knew it was wrong, and then afterwards something bad would happen. So always listen to your inner voice.
So let's get to the
Oh, Lord.
last sauce, if you're ready for that.
All right, I'll do it,
All
but
right.
I'm gonna take a small bite.
This one's a little, it kicks in after a while, so watch out. So you've produced for National Geographic, CNN, Vice
Oh,
News,
Lord.
Vice News as well.
Yeah.
Why does teaching young journalists interest you? And what is the one?
I'm not responding to that. I'm responding to that. I'm not responding to your question. I'm responding to this chicken wing.
Milk? You need milk?
Yeah.
Celery?
You feel that?
Yeah. Yeah, you'll hear sounds coming from your stomach that you've never heard before, by the way. So you've produced and reported for National Geographic, CNN, Vice News. Talk about your experience in working for those outlets, and why does teaching young journalists interest you so much?
I think I've worked in the traditional platform and in the digital platform. I have had foot in both worlds, which is really cool because I know what traditional journalism is, and I also know the digital age of journalism where things are changing at a rapid rate. Teaching here, I'm talking to you guys, and you're part of that generation who is going with this shift. And so I think teaching here keeps me on my toes.
From your experience, what do you
Yeah.
think's in such shift?
I've noticed, the young generation, for instance, do you watch TV all the time? How do you consume your news?
Twitter.
Okay, so there's a shift in the way we're consuming news and watching the news and sharing it. So I think that's what I'm curious about, to see where it's going and to be part of that movement while keeping journalistic integrity and storytelling in mind.
What has been the most rewarding story that you've worked on, as far as a short film, mini documentary, anything?
For me, it's been covering the refugee crisis on the Myanmar border. And not just being a witness, but telling the stories of people who suffered unimaginable atrocities. And yeah, being able to uncover that story as it happened in front of me.
So going forward, you want to work on any different types of stories, or do you want to stick with the types of topics that you've been covering so far?
Yeah, I'm into hard-hitting stories. So the next piece we're working on, my partner and I, we're working on a series, and one of our stories is set to take place in Afghanistan.
Wow.
So I just got done with hostile environment training, I think a 5-day course to prep us for going to Kabul, hopefully at the end of this year.
Awesome. Well, good luck with that story.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you being here on Hot Takes and going through the gauntlet with us.
Oh yeah, that was really tough.
The last two were probably the toughest. They kind of linger in.
Still lingering. It's really painful.
To our viewers at home, you're watching USG Hot Takes with new first-year journalism professor here at Stony Brook, Tania Rashid. I'm your host, A.T Bianco. Thank you for watching. I have a hard time keeping a straight face sometimes.
I'm sure I made a lot of faces and my nose was running. I don't know.
Hey, what's up, Seawolves? Thanks for watching that last episode. If you want to see more episodes, check us out on our YouTube channel at SBUSG. Thanks for watching.